He stole everything from me. Elijah's voice cracked, echoing through the grand marble lobby as two massive security guards dragged him backward. His expensive suit was crumpled, his face red with a mix of fury and absolute humiliation. I stood perfectly still, adjusting my cuffs, watching him thrash against the guards while our parents stared in horrified silence. They thought I was just a lowly assistant here tonight. They had no idea the billionaire CEO standing next to me had just handed me the keys to their entire future. Before I tell you how my golden child brother lost it all in one spectacular night, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. The heavy glass doors of the Grand Hotel swung shut, cutting off the sound of my brother's frantic shouting. Outside, the city traffic continued its endless crawl, completely indifferent to the fact that Elijah's world had just violently collapsed. I stood in the lobby, the polished marble floor reflecting the dazzling crystal chandeliers above. The silence that followed his forced exit was deafening. My mother, Martha, had her hands clamped over her mouth. Her eyes darted wildly between the exit where her favorite son had just been thrown out like common trash, and me, standing calmly next to Mr. Sterling. My father, Robert, looked like he had physically aged 10 years in the span of 3 minutes. His jaw hung slack. He tried to take a step toward me, his hand reaching out, but the cold, impenetrable wall of Mr. Sterling's private security detail subtly shifted, blocking his path. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I just looked at the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel completely invisible. Mr. Sterling, a man whose net worth could buy and sell our entire hometown, turned to me. He adjusted his impeccably tailored jacket and spoke in that quiet, commanding tone that moved markets. "Are we finished here, Mason?" I looked at my parents one last time. I saw the desperate confusion in their eyes. They were trying to reconcile the boy they had discarded with the man standing before them. "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice steady. "We are completely finished." As we walked toward the private elevator, leaving my parents stranded in the lobby of a world they would never belong to, my mind didn't dwell on the victory. It didn't revel in the humiliation I had just handed back to them. Instead, it pulled me backward. It pulled me back through the years of grinding hustle, the sleepless nights, and the bitter betrayals. They asked themselves tonight how I could be so utterly ruthless. They looked at me like I was a stranger who had suddenly invaded their lives just to tear down their golden boy. But they forgot. People like my parents always forget the damage they do. They sweep it under the rug and call it family loyalty. To understand why I didn't lift a single finger to stop those guards from dragging my brother out, you have to go back 7 years. You have to go back to the night that broke me, and ultimately the night that built me. You have to go back to the day I turned 18. I wasn't always this hardened. When I was younger, I actually believed in the concept of family. I believed that if I just kept my head down, did the right thing, and caused no trouble, eventually, it would be my turn. I was wrong. In our household, there was no turn for anyone except Elijah. Elijah was 3 years older than me, and he consumed all the oxygen in any room he walked into. He was the star athlete who never practiced, the charming talker who never meant a word he said, and the absolute center of my parents' universe. But charm only gets you so far in the real world. By the time he hit his early 20s, the cracks were not just showing. They were splitting the foundation of our house. He dropped out of college after 2 semesters, claiming the professors were intimidated by his natural brilliance. My parents nodded along, emptying a portion of their savings to cover his broken lease. He bounced from job to job, always fired due to jealous managers or toxic work environments. And every time he crashed, my parents were right there with a safety net woven out of their finances and my neglect. I was the invisible cleaner. I was the one who made sure the trash was taken out, the lawn was mowed, and the peace was kept. I got straight A's in high school. I remember bringing home my final report card in my junior year. I had scored at the top of my class. I placed it on the kitchen counter, waiting for a simple good job. Instead, my mother walked right past it, holding a cold compress to her forehead. Elijah had just gone through a spectacularly messy divorce after a 6-month marriage, and the house was in a state of mourning. "Not now, Mason," she had snapped, batting the report card away. "Can't you see your brother is going through hell? He's dealing with lawyers and a divorce. Have some sympathy." That was the running theme. My achievements were always a footnote to Elijah's disasters. I was constantly told that I was the strong one, the independent one. It was their convenient excuse to ignore me. "You don't need us, Mason," my father would say, clapping me on the shoulder while handing Elijah the keys to his car. "Elijah needs a little help finding his footing." I accepted it. I internalized the idea that my role was to shrink so Elijah could expand. I told myself that once I turned 18, I would quietly pack my bags, go to a state college, and start my own life. I didn't want a grand send-off. I just wanted a peaceful exit. But my family couldn't even give me that. The weeks leading up to my 18th birthday were predictably chaotic. But the chaos had nothing to do with me. Elijah had just lost another job, this time at a mid-level marketing firm. He spent his days sulking on the living room sofa, watching daytime television and complaining about how unfair the world was to him. The atmosphere in the house was thick with my parents' anxiety. They tiptoed around him like he was a live explosive. When my mother finally remembered my birthday was approaching, she cornered me in the kitchen while I was doing the dishes. "Mason, honey," she started, using that soft, placating tone she reserved for when she was about to ask me to sacrifice something. "You're turning 18 next Friday. We should do a little family dinner. Just us." I nodded, genuinely relieved. "That sounds perfect, Mom. Just a quiet dinner. I don't need anything big." I should have known better. 2 days later, Aunt Clara descended upon our house. Aunt Clara was my mother's older sister, a woman who treated family dynamics like a competitive sport. She had a sharp nose for vulnerability and loved nothing more than orchestrating drama while pretending to be helpful. She found my mother in the dining room and immediately went to work. I was sitting in the adjacent hallway, reading a book for AP History, when I heard her voice drifting through the open doorway. "Martha, you cannot be serious," Aunt Clara was saying, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "A quiet dinner? What will people think? It looks like you're hiding." "Hiding what, Clara?" my mother asked defensively. "Elijah's situation, of course. The neighbors are talking. Everyone knows he got fired again. If you just have a sad little dinner for Mason, it looks like the family is in mourning. You need to throw a party. A big one. Show everyone that the family is doing just fine. It will be so good for Elijah's morale to see people, to socialize, to feel important again." I stopped reading. My stomach tightened into a hard knot. I waited for my mother to defend me. I waited for her to say, "But it's Mason's 18th birthday, Clara. It's his milestone." Instead, there was a long pause. Then my mother sighed. "You might be right, Clara. Elijah has been so depressed. A lively environment might pull him out of this funk. But Mason specifically asked for something quiet." "Oh, Mason will understand." Clara dismissed the thought with a wave of her hand that I could practically hear. "He's always been the easy one. He doesn't care about parties anyway. Besides, it's still his birthday party on paper. We're just opening it up a bit." That was the moment the hijacking began. The subtle, insidious theft of my day. Over the next 48 hours, the quiet dinner mutated into a catered event. The guest list, originally meant to be just the 4 of us and maybe my grandparents, suddenly ballooned to 50 people. I watched as my mother sat at the kitchen island, enthusiastically writing down names. I walked up behind her and glanced at the list. I didn't recognize half the people on it. "Mom, who are these guys?" I pointed to a cluster of names at the bottom. She didn't look up from her notepad. "Oh, those are Elijah's friends from his old fraternity. He hasn't seen them in a while, and I thought it would be a nice surprise for him." "At my birthday party?" I asked, my voice tight. She finally looked at me, her expression hardening just a fraction. It was the look she gave me whenever I dared to disrupt the narrative she was building for Elijah. "Mason, please don't be selfish. You know how hard things have been for your brother. You have your whole life ahead of you. You're going off to college. You have your college fund intact. Let him have this one night to feel good about himself. It's just a party. I clenched my jaw. There was that phrase again. Don't be selfish. In our house, asking for basic consideration was the ultimate act of selfishness. I didn't argue. I just turned and walked up to my room. I realized then that my parents didn't see me as a person with my own needs and desires. They saw me as a utility. And right now, my birthday was just an excuse, a vehicle they were using to deliver a dose of confidence to my brother. The preparations went into overdrive. The food ordered was entirely Elijah's favorites: spicy barbecue wings and heavy sliders, foods I actively disliked due to a sensitive stomach. The decorations changed from a simple banner to an extravagant setup that looked more suited for a college graduation. But the worst part, the part that truly drove a wedge into my chest, wasn't what my parents were doing. It was what happened next with the only person I thought was actually on my side. Julian was my best friend. We had known each other since middle school. He was the guy I studied with, the guy I played video games with, and the guy I vented to when my house felt too suffocating. Julian knew exactly how my parents treated me. He knew all about the Elijah show. When I told him how my birthday had been hijacked, he had shaken his head in disgust. "Man, that is messed up," Julian had said as we sat on the hood of his beat-up Honda in the school parking lot. "Just survive the night, bro. We'll go get burgers on Saturday. Just the two of us. Real birthday style." That promise was my anchor. I figured I could endure a few hours of being a background prop at my own house if I knew Julian was there, rolling his eyes with me from the corner of the room. 2 days before the party, I came home from a late shift at my part-time job. The house was unusually quiet. My parents had gone to the grocery store for last-minute supplies. I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of water and heard voices coming from our back patio. It was Elijah and Julian. I froze, the glass halfway to the faucet. Julian never hung out with Elijah. Julian thought Elijah was an arrogant jerk. I moved silently toward the sliding glass door, staying hidden behind the curtains. They were sitting at the patio table. Elijah was leaning back, smoking a cigar he probably stole from our dad's study, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Julian was leaning forward, looking anxious. "So, the playlist is set?" Elijah asked, blowing a ring of smoke into the evening air. "No weird indie rock crap Mason listens to?" "No, I swapped the Spotify queue," Julian said, his voice dropping slightly. "It's all the hip-hop tracks you wanted. And I made sure to text your fraternity guys that the party starts at 8, not 7. That way they miss the boring family stuff and show up right when the drinks start flowing." My chest seized. My lungs felt like they had been filled with concrete. Julian was helping him. Julian, my anchor, was actively orchestrating the takeover. "Good man," Elijah chuckled, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a wad of cash and tossed several bills across the table. "Here, that should cover the down payment on that car part you were crying about. Keep doing me favors, and maybe I'll introduce you to some of the girls coming on Friday. They like guys who know how to play the game." Julian scooped up the cash with an eager nod. "Thanks, Elijah. Seriously, Mason he's so boring about this stuff anyway. He wouldn't even know what to do with a real party." I backed away from the window, couldn't breathe. The betrayal hit me harder than anything my parents had ever done. My parents' neglect was a constant, a dull ache I had grown used to. But Julian was supposed to be my safe harbor. And he sold me out for a handful of cash and a nod of approval from a guy he claimed to despise. I walked up the stairs, my legs feeling like lead. I didn't burst onto the patio. I didn't scream at them. I just went into my room, locked the door, and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. I realized something profound in that darkness. I was completely alone. The narrative my mother spun about family loyalty was a lie designed to keep me compliant. The friendship I had relied on was transactional. Every relationship in my life was infected by the gravity of my brother. If I stayed in this orbit, I would eventually be crushed into dust. The next morning, I saw Julian at my locker. He smiled at me, a wide, fake grin. "Hey man, Ready for the big bash tomorrow? I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the weakness behind his eyes, the pathetic need to align himself with whoever seemed to hold the power. I felt a cold detachment settle over my skin. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. Yeah, I said, my voice completely flat. It's going to be a night to remember. I didn't confront him. There was no point. Confrontation requires a desire to fix a relationship, to seek understanding. I had no desire to fix anything. I was done. The party was no longer a dread I had to survive. It was a deadline. I spent that Thursday night quietly packing a single duffel bag. I packed my clothes, my laptop, my high school diploma, and every dollar I had saved from working retail over the past 2 years. I hid the bag under my bed. When the sun rose on Friday, my 18th birthday, I didn't feel older. I just felt ready. By 8 o'clock that evening, my childhood home was unrecognizable. The quiet suburban house had been transformed into a loud, thumping nightclub. Julian had done his job well. The bass rattled the windows, playing music I despised. Cars lined the street for blocks. I stood at the top of the stairs, looking down into the living room. It was packed. People were laughing, drinking from red plastic cups, and shouting over the noise. I gripped the wooden banister, feeling like an intruder breaking into a stranger's house. I walked down the stairs. Nobody noticed me. I navigated through the crowd in the kitchen, squeezing past groups of guys wearing college sweatshirts. "Excuse me," I muttered, trying to reach the refrigerator to get a bottle of water. A guy twice my size bumped into me, spilling beer on my sneakers. He didn't even look down. "Watch it, kid," he barked, turning back to his conversation. I grabbed my water and retreated to the edge of the living room. I stood against the wall, a ghost haunting my own celebration. My eyes scanned the room and eventually found the center of gravity. Elijah was standing by the fireplace, holding court. He had a drink in one hand and was gesturing wildly with the other, telling some exaggerated story about his brief stint at college. A circle of people surrounded him, hanging on his every word. My mother was standing near the edge of his circle, beaming with pride, holding a tray of appetizers that she only offered to his friends. My father was at the patio door, laughing loudly with another group of older men. Not a single person had approached me to say happy birthday. Not one. Then I saw Cousin Sarah. She was standing near the hallway, sipping a soda. Sarah had always been the quiet observer in our extended family. We made eye contact across the crowded room. I saw the realization hit her. She looked from me, standing alone against the wall, to Elijah, soaking up the adoration in the center of the room. I saw the guilt flash across her face. She knew exactly what was happening. She knew how wrong this was. For a split second, I thought she might walk over. I thought she might cross the room, put a hand on my shoulder, and acknowledge my existence. But then, Elijah called out her name, dragging her into his story to verify some fabricated detail. Sarah looked back at me, her eyes apologetic, and then she turned away. She chose the easy path. She chose the golden child. I watched her laugh at his joke, and the last tether holding me to this family snapped. I wasn't angry anymore. The simmering resentment that had plagued me for years suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, sharp focus. I realized that my parents hadn't just thrown a party for Elijah. They had orchestrated my erasure. They were actively erasing me from my own life milestone to make space for him. I saw Julian near the kitchen island, laughing and clinking cups with one of Elijah's fraternity brothers. The betrayal didn't even sting anymore. It just confirmed what I already knew. Suddenly, the heavy bass of the music cut out. The sudden silence was jarring. My father clapped his hands loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "All right, everybody, gather round," Robert shouted, his face flushed with alcohol and excitement. "It's time for the cake." The crowd cheered, parting slightly to make a pathway from the kitchen. My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm in my chest. This was it, the grand finale of the charade. I stayed pressed against the wall. I didn't step forward. I didn't try to claim my space. I just watched. My mother walked out of the kitchen, her face glowing under the dining room lights. She was carrying a massive sheet cake. The candles blazed, casting flickering shadows across the room. She walked slowly, carefully, a wide smile plastered on her face. She didn't walk toward me. She walked straight to the center of the room. She walked straight to Elijah. The crowd closed in around them. I could barely see the cake through the sea of shoulders, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening. "All right, let's sing," my father bellowed. The off-key chorus of 50 people began to echo through my house. "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you." I stood perfectly still, my breathing shallow. I waited for the crucial line. I waited to see how far they were willing to go. "Happy birthday, dear," my mother's voice rang out above the rest, clear and joyful. "Elijah and Mason," she said his name first. "On my 18th birthday." As the song finished and the crowd cheered, I saw a gap in the people. I saw the cake. Written in thick, bold blue icing across the center were the words, "Happy 18th again, Elijah," and squished into the bottom right corner, almost falling off the edge in a tiny, hurried script, was "and Mason." "Blow out the candles, boys," my father cheered. Elijah leaned over the cake, laughing. He didn't even look around to find me. He took a deep breath and blew out the candles in one dramatic gust. The room erupted in applause and whistles. My mother looked up, her eyes finally scanning the room. She found me leaning against the wall. For a fraction of a second, her smile faltered. Maybe she saw the absolute deadness in my eyes. Maybe the reality of what she had done finally pierced her delusion. But instead of apologizing, instead of calling me forward, she gave me a small, tight smile and mouthed, "Let's celebrate both. It's special for everyone." I didn't nod. I didn't smile back. I pushed myself off the wall. The crowd was already breaking apart, turning their attention back to the alcohol and the music starting up again. No one noticed me moving. I was exactly what they wanted me to be, invisible. I walked quietly down the hallway to the hall closet. I opened it, bypassing my father's heavy coats, and pulled out my dark denim jacket. I slipped it on. The fabric felt like armor. I walked past the kitchen. I could hear Elijah loudly demanding the first slice of cake. I walked past the living room, where Julian was aggressively trying to flirt with a girl clearly out of his league. I reached the front door. I placed my hand on the brass knob. I paused for one single heartbeat. I thought about the 18 years I had spent in this house. The quiet obedience. The desperate hope that one day doing the right thing would be enough. I realized that keeping the peace meant fighting a war against myself. And I was done losing. I turned the knob. The heavy door opened, letting in the cool night air. I stepped out onto the porch. Behind me, the muffled thumping of the bass continued. No one called my name. No one rushed out to stop me. I pulled the door shut behind me. Click. That sound, the solid metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place, was the loudest thing I heard all night. It was the sound of a chapter ending permanently. I walked down the driveway, passing the rows of parked cars belonging to strangers. I didn't look back at the house. I kept my eyes on the streetlights reflecting off the dark asphalt. I walked to the end of the block, retrieved the duffel bag I had hidden behind some bushes earlier that afternoon, and kept walking. I didn't know exactly where I was going. I just knew I was never going back. The first night, I slept on a bench at a 24-hour bus terminal. It was uncomfortable, cold, and smelled like stale coffee and exhaust. But as I lay there, using my duffel bag as a pillow, I felt a strange sensation expanding in my chest. It took me a few hours to recognize it. It was oxygen. For the first time in my life, I could breathe without the suffocating weight of my family's expectations crushing my lungs. I spent the next 2 days figuring out logistics. I bought a cheap burner phone with my saved cash. I found a seedy motel on the outskirts of the city that rented rooms by the week with no credit check. I started applying for every entry-level manual labor job I could find online at the local library. It wasn't glamorous. It was terrifying. I was eating cheap instant noodles and counting every penny. But every dollar I spent was mine. Every decision I made was mine. On the third day, my original cell phone, the one still tied to my parents' family plan, started buzzing wildly on the cheap motel nightstand. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress and stared at the screen. It was my mother. She had called 6 times in the last hour. I watched it ring, the vibration shaking a half-empty water bottle. I finally picked it up and hit accept. I didn't say anything. I just held it to my ear. Mason. Her voice was shrill, completely devoid of maternal worry. It was the voice of a woman whose carefully constructed image had been inconvenienced. Where on earth are you? Are you done with this little tantrum? I remained silent. You embarrassed us, Mason, she continued, her tone escalating into anger. Do you have any idea how it looked when people asked where the birthday boy was, and you had just vanished? You ruined the end of the party. I heard my father's voice booming in the background. Tell him if he doesn't get his ungrateful self back here by dinner, he can forget about his college fund. A dry, humorless chuckle escaped my throat. The college fund. The one they had already bled dry to pay for Elijah's mistakes. They were threatening me with an empty weapon. Did you hear your father? She snapped. Elijah is very upset. He feels terrible that you overreacted like this. Keep the party, Mom, I said. My voice was raspy, completely devoid of emotion. It didn't sound like the quiet, obedient son she knew. It sounded like a stranger. Keep the party. Keep the house. Keep him. Mason, what are you talking about? Come home right now and... I pulled the phone away from my ear, ended the call, and popped the back cover off. I pulled out the SIM card, snapped the small piece of plastic in half between my fingers, and dropped it into the motel trash can. The silence in the room was absolute. I lay back on the bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling. The storm had passed. I was entirely alone in the wreckage, but for the first time I was the one holding the hammer. The next 3 years were a brutal, unforgiving grind. When you cut ties with your entire support system at 18, the world doesn't applaud your bravery. It immediately tries to crush you. I didn't go to a state college. I couldn't afford to play games with student loans and debt. I needed capital, and I needed it fast. I started working 2 jobs. By day, I was a runner for a mid-sized corporate law firm downtown. I delivered documents, fetched coffee, and listened. I listened to how the attorneys spoke, how they negotiated, and how they weaponized information. By night, I worked at a high-end restaurant, cleaning tables and watching the city's elite throw around money like it was confetti. I lived in a studio apartment the size of a closet, sleeping 4 hours a night. I had no friends. I didn't date. Every ounce of my energy was poured into observing, learning, and saving. I taught myself financial modeling on a cheap, second-hand laptop using free online courses. I learned how to read market trends, how to identify undervalued assets, and most importantly, how to remain completely invisible while doing it. The skill my family had forced upon me, the ability to be a ghost in the room, became my greatest asset in the corporate world. My break came when I was 21. I had managed to land a junior analyst position at a boutique investment firm. It was a grunt role, mostly data entry and compiling spreadsheets for the senior brokers. That's where I met Carter. Carter was a senior partner, a man in his late 50s with sharp eyes and zero tolerance for incompetence. He terrified the rest of the junior staff. They avoided his office like it was lined with landmines. I didn't. I saw Carter as a lock that needed picking. One evening, long after everyone else had left, I noticed Carter reviewing a massive portfolio for a potential tech acquisition. I had been quietly tracking that specific tech sector for months. I compiled a brief, brutal 2-page analysis pointing out glaring liabilities in the target company's supply chain, liabilities the senior team had missed because they were blinded by the flashy revenue projections. I slipped the folder under his door and went home. The next morning, my desk phone rang. It was Carter. Get in here. I walked into his corner office. He tossed my 2-page report onto his glass desk. You wrote this, he demanded. Yes, sir. I replied, keeping my posture straight and my voice level. He stared at me for a long, calculating moment. He didn't ask about my pedigree. He didn't ask where I went to school or who my father was. He only cared about the data. This is a massacre. If we buy this, we're acquiring a sinking ship. He tapped the paper. You're right. And the senior analysts are idiots. That single interaction changed the trajectory of my life. Carter didn't just give me a pat on the back. He saw a weapon and he decided to sharpen it. Over the next year, he pulled me out of the bullpen and made me his direct protege. He threw me into high-stakes negotiations, forcing me to sink or swim. I swam. When I brought in my first independent deal, a restructuring play that netted the firm millions, Carter slid a piece of paper across his desk. It was a new contract, a massive promotion. I looked at the number written under salary. It was more money than my father had made in 5 years. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a raw electric thrill. I hadn't begged for this. I hadn't waited for it to be handed to me. I had hunted it down and killed it myself. You've got a killer instinct, Mason, Carter said, pouring 2 glasses of scotch. He handed me one. You don't operate on emotion. You operate on leverage. Where did a kid your age learn to be so cold? I took a sip of the scotch. It burned perfectly all the way down. I had good teachers, I said quietly. I was building an empire in the shadows. I intentionally kept my digital footprint non-existent. No social media. No public profiles. In the financial sector, I was becoming known as Carter's unseen architect, the guy who ran the numbers and orchestrated the takeovers from behind a firewall. I was wealthy, I was respected, and I was completely free. Or so I thought. I had underestimated the desperate lengths a drowning man will go to when he smells a lifeline. Elijah was drowning. While I had spent the last 4 years building a foundation out of concrete, he had spent it building a house of cards. Through the grapevine of public records, which I casually monitored out of a cold, detached curiosity, I knew his life was unraveling. The messy divorce had cost him dearly. He was jumping between failed entrepreneurial ventures, bleeding our parents' retirement accounts dry. And then he found me. I still don't know exactly how he tracked me down. Maybe a stray piece of mail forwarded to an old address, or maybe he hired a cheap private investigator. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Elijah discovered I wasn't rotting in a ditch somewhere. He discovered I was working at a prestigious investment firm in the city. He didn't know my title. He didn't know my net worth. To him, I was still just Mason, the little brother who was supposed to be beneath him. He probably assumed I was answering phones or sorting mail. But in Elijah's mind, proximity to wealth meant I had access to it, and he felt entitled to whatever I had. He didn't try to contact me directly. He knew I wouldn't answer. Instead, he did what he always did. He manipulated someone weaker to do his dirty work. Enter Dylan. Dylan was a mid-level associate at my firm. He was a classic nepotism hire, loud, arrogant, and dangerously incompetent. He wore suits that were too tight, reeked of expensive cologne, and deeply resented the fact that I, a younger guy with no Ivy League background, was Carter's right hand. Dylan was desperate for a win to secure his own promotion. One Tuesday afternoon, my internal security software pinged an alert. Someone had tried to access a restricted folder on the firm's shared server using my credentials. The folder contained highly sensitive forecasts for an upcoming corporate buyout. If those numbers leaked, it would violate federal regulations, instantly destroy the deal, and end my career in handcuffs. I didn't panic. I traced the IP address. Came from Dylan's workstation. I didn't report him to HR. That was too simple. I needed to know why he was targeting me. I waited until Dylan left for lunch, slipped into his office, and bypassed his ridiculously simple computer password. I opened his personal email. There it was. An email thread with an unfamiliar address. But the writing style was unmistakably arrogant. It was Elijah. The emails made my blood run cold. Elijah had somehow connected with Dylan, likely haunting the expensive bars near our office, and figured out Dylan hated me. Elijah was playing a masterful game of manipulation. He told Dylan a sob story about how I had abandoned the family and stolen money from our parents. My parents are desperate to get him home, Elijah wrote in one email. He's unstable. If he loses this job, he'll have to come back and face the music. Get me something that shows he's screwing up, and I'll make sure my dad's golfing buddies throw their portfolios your way. It was a blatant lie. My father didn't have wealthy golfing buddies. But Dylan was greedy and stupid enough to believe it. Elijah wasn't trying to bring me home out of love. He was trying to destroy my livelihood so I would be as broken and dependent as he was. If I was dragged back to the bottom, his failures wouldn't look so bad. I sat at Dylan's desk, staring at the screen. The old Mason, the 18-year-old kid, would have felt a crushing wave of depression. He would have felt victimized. The new Mason felt nothing but a dark, predatory calm. I didn't delete the emails. I didn't confront Dylan. I backed out of his computer, went back to my office, and began to build a trap. If Dylan wanted confidential data to leak and pin on me, I was going to give it to him. Over the next week, I carefully constructed a shadow server. I filled it with highly technical, incredibly convincing, but completely fabricated financial projections regarding a dummy corporation. I made the data look like the holy grail of insider trading. Then, I intentionally left a backdoor open in my own firewall. A breadcrumb trail so obvious that even an idiot like Dylan could follow it. I watched the server logs in real time on a Friday night. At 8:45 p.m., Dylan took the bait. I watched his IP address download the fabricated files. I imagined him sitting in his office, sweating, thinking he had just secured the evidence to ruin my career and secure his promotion. He immediately forwarded the files to an external competitor's Dropbox, an illegal move designed to frame me for corporate espionage. What Dylan didn't know was that Carter and I had already flagged that external Dropbox with the firm's cybersecurity team. The moment Dylan hit send, the system locked his workstation, flagged his employee ID, and sent a direct alert to the firm's legal counsel. On Monday morning, Dylan didn't make it past the lobby. Security escorted him into a private conference room with our lawyers. He was terminated immediately, facing potential federal charges for attempting to steal corporate secrets. He tried to blame me, screaming that I set him up, but the digital trail he left, the one I designed, proved he acted alone maliciously. As security marched Dylan out of the building, he saw me standing by the elevators. He glared at me, his face pale with panic. I just offered him a slow, cold nod. Dylan was neutralized, but he was just the pawn. The real target was the man pulling the strings. Elijah thought he could reach into my world and break my legs from a distance. He thought I was still the quiet kid leaning against the wall at the party. He was about to find out that the kid he threw away had built an empire, and I was about to invite him to the execution. Gemini to NOI fan 52MUC1. 852. The night of the annual Sterling Foundation Gala was the kind of event that shut down 3 city blocks. Black SUVs lined the streets. The red carpet stretched up the marble steps of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks as the city's elite stepped out of their vehicles. I was 25 years old, standing inside the grand foyer, adjusting the cuffs of a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. 7 years had passed since I walked out of my childhood home with nothing but a duffel bag and a burner phone. Tonight, I was overseeing the final signatures on a corporate merger that would redefine the tech sector in our state. Carter had entrusted the final negotiations to me. I wasn't just in the room anymore. I owned the room. The foyer smelled of expensive lilies and old money. I stood near a towering ice sculpture, nursing a glass of sparkling water, waiting for Mr. Sterling to arrive. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a text from Carter confirming the final contract drafts were printed. I looked up to check the time on the gold clock above the entrance. That was when I saw them. It was like a ghost from a past life walking through the revolving glass doors. Elijah. And right behind him, looking entirely out of place in their rented formal wear, were my parents, Robert and Martha. My grip tightened on my glass. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Out of all the people in this city of millions, they had managed to secure invitations to this specific event. Later, I would find out Elijah had begged, borrowed, and practically mortgaged his failing startup just to buy a low-tier sponsor table. He was desperate. His business was sinking, his investors were pulling out, and he needed to rub shoulders with the giants tonight to beg for a bailout. He brought our parents along as props to make him look like a grounded, family-oriented businessman. Elijah was scanning the room with that same arrogant, hungry look he had on my 18th birthday. He wore a tuxedo that didn't quite fit right across the shoulders. My mother clung to his arm, looking around with wide, anxious eyes, completely overwhelmed by the sheer wealth surrounding her. They walked directly past the VIP check-in desk, ignoring the velvet ropes. Elijah was gesturing broadly, telling my father some fabricated story about how he knew half the board of directors. I stayed perfectly still, half hidden by the floral arrangements. I watched them navigate the room. I felt no fear. I felt no sadness. I just felt a cold, clinical curiosity. I wanted to see how the world treated them when they didn't have me to clean up their messes. Suddenly, Elijah's eyes locked onto mine. He stopped dead in his tracks. The smug smile slid off his face, replaced immediately by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion. My mother followed his gaze, and her hand flew to her mouth. My father just stared. They marched over to me, not with hesitation, not with regret, with the exact same entitled stride they had used to trample over me my entire childhood. "Mason," Elijah sneered, looking me up and down. He took in my suit, but his brain refused to process the reality of it. To him, I was still the invisible loser. "What the hell are you doing here?" Before I could answer, my mother stepped forward. Her voice was a hushed, frantic whisper. "Mason, we've been worried sick for years, and you just show up working at a catering gig? Are you a waiter here?" She actually believed it. In her mind, the only way I could be standing in a room this opulent was if I was serving the food. Elijah barked out a laugh. "Of course he is. Look at him standing by the drinks. Listen, Mason, since you're working, go fetch me a scotch. Neat. And make it quick. I have important people to meet tonight." I looked at my brother. I looked at the dark circles under his eyes, the subtle tremor in his hands. He was terrified of going bankrupt, and he was projecting his panic onto me. "I'm not getting you a drink, Elijah," I said. My voice was low, smooth, and completely devoid of the intimidation he expected. My father's face turned red. "Don't you take that tone with your brother," he hissed, stepping closer. "He is trying to save our family's investments. He's here on business. You will show him some respect, or I'll have a word with your catering manager." "You don't want to speak to my manager, Robert?" I replied, using his first name. I saw him flinch. Just then, Chloe, the head of PR for the Sterling Foundation, marched over. She had an earpiece in and held a glowing tablet. She was a woman who didn't tolerate fools. She looked at Elijah, then down at her tablet. "Excuse me," Chloe said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You are blocking the main thoroughfare for our platinum-level guests." "Name?" "Elijah," he said, puffing out his chest. "I'm a silver sponsor. I'm here to see Mr. Sterling." Chloe swiped a finger across her screen. She didn't even look up. "Silver sponsors are seated in the overflow ballroom on the second floor. You are not on the VIP reception list. Please clear the area." Elijah's face flushed purple. "Do you know who I am?" "I'm a CEO. You're a fire hazard at the moment," Chloe replied dryly. She turned to me, her entire demeanor softening into deep professional respect. "Mason, Mr. Sterling's convoy is pulling up right now. He asked that you meet him at the doors." My parents froze. The air in the circle seemed to vanish. Elijah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked from Chloe's respectful posture to my calm, indifferent face. The puzzle pieces in his head were aggressively trying to fit together, but he was fighting the picture they were forming. "Thank you, Chloe," I said. I didn't look back at my family. I just turned and walked toward the grand entrance. The show was about to begin. Fan 52 MUC2. 8:52. The heavy brass-handled doors of the hotel were pulled open by the doorman. Outside, the flashbulbs went into a blinding frenzy. A midnight black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a halt at the base of the red carpet. The city seemed to hold its breath. I stood at the top of the short interior stairs, looking down into the foyer. I could see the reflection of my family in the glass panels. They had followed me at a distance, hovering near the coat check, watching with wide, desperate eyes. Elijah was bouncing slightly on his heels. He thought this was his moment. He thought he could somehow piggyback on whatever small connection he assumed I had with the event staff to get FaceTime with the billionaire. The rear door of the Phantom opened. Mr. Sterling stepped out. He was a man of immense presence, with silver hair and a tailored charcoal suit that screamed power. The room immediately went dead silent. The chatter stopped. The clinking of glasses ceased. Every major executive, politician, and investor in the room turned their attention to the entrance. Sterling walked up the red carpet. The hotel manager was practically bowing as he opened the interior doors. Sterling ignored him. He ignored the flashes. He walked into the foyer, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. Elijah couldn't help himself. His desperation overrode his common sense. He broke away from my parents and shoved his way to the front of the crowd, right into Sterling's path. "Mr. Sterling," Elijah called out, his voice cracking slightly. He thrust his hand forward. "Elijah, CEO of Tech Forward Solutions. It is an absolute honor to—" Sterling didn't even break his stride. He didn't look at Elijah's face. He merely raised one hand, a silent, dismissive gesture that signaled his private security detail. Two massive men in dark suits seamlessly stepped forward, wedging their shoulders between Elijah and Sterling, forcing my brother to stumble backward into a decorative potted fern. Elijah looked horrified. The executives around him were whispering and pointing. The golden boy was being treated exactly like what he was, a nuisance. Sterling kept walking. He looked up the short flight of stairs and saw me. A genuine smile broke across the billionaire's face. It was a smile the media rarely caught. He walked straight up to me, bypassing the mayor and two state senators. He didn't offer his hand to shake. He reached out and grasped my shoulder firmly, an undeniable display of deep respect and partnership. "Mason," Sterling said, his voice booming clearly across the silent foyer. "Carter told me you finished the final risk assessments on the merger. He said you found the loophole that saved us $40 million. "I did, sir," I replied, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "The documents are ready for your signature in the private suite." "Brilliant," Sterling said. He turned to the crowd, addressing the room at large. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to the man who makes sure I never make a bad investment. My senior strategic director, and the undisputed architect of tonight's merger, Mason." The room erupted into applause. Genuine, respectful applause from the most powerful people in the state. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked straight at the coat check. My father was gripping the edge of a table, his knuckles white. My mother had both hands over her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of joy. They were tears of absolute shock and regret. The boy they had literally erased from a birthday cake to make room for their favorite son was now standing at the apex of the corporate world. And then there was Elijah. He had untangled himself from the fern. His face was a mask of pure agony. He was watching the applause, watching the billionaire pat my shoulder. The reality of his own failure was finally colliding with the undeniable proof of my success. The narrative he had lived his entire life, that he was special and I was the background noise, had just been incinerated in front of 500 people. He couldn't take it. His fragile ego shattered right there on the marble floor. "That's my brother," Elijah suddenly screamed. The applause died down. People turned to look at the disheveled, sweating man standing near the entrance. "He's my little brother," Elijah yelled, taking a step toward the stairs, his eyes wild. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Tell them, Mason. Tell them we're family. I'm the one who taught him everything. He's supposed to help me." He took another step, but he never made it to the stairs. Mr. Sterling's security detail moved faster than I could blink. The two massive guards who had bumped Elijah earlier now clamped their hands onto his shoulders with the force of an industrial vice. "Get your hands off me!" Elijah shrieked, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He began to thrash violently, twisting his body, his expensive rented suit jacket ripping at the seam. "Mason, tell them. I need the funding. You owe me. I'm your brother. He stole everything from me." Elijah's voice cracked, echoing through the grand marble lobby as the two guards dragged him backward toward the glass doors. His face was red with a mix of fury and absolute humiliation. I stood perfectly still, adjusting my cuffs. I looked down at him from the top of the stairs. Mr. Sterling leaned in close to me. "Do you know this man, Mason?" he asked quietly. I looked at my mother, who was sobbing openly now, too terrified of the security guards to intervene. I looked at my father, who was staring at the floor, too ashamed to meet my eyes. Then I looked back at Elijah, who was now being physically lifted off the ground, his dress shoes scraping against the marble. "No, sir," I said. My voice was calm and carrying enough for the front row of the crowd to hear. "I have no idea who that is." Elijah let out a guttural sound of pure despair as the doors swung open and the cold night air swallowed him. The guards tossed him out onto the pavement. The silence in the foyer returned. The hotel manager frantically signaled for the string quartet to start playing again. The tension slowly dissolved into hushed, eager gossip. I didn't smile. I didn't feel the overwhelming rush of victory I thought I would. Instead, I felt a deep, profound sense of closure. The phantom weight that I had been carrying on my shoulders since I was a child finally detached itself and blew away. I had just watched the monster under my bed get dragged out into the daylight, and I realized he wasn't a monster at all. He was just a pathetic, weak man who had run out of people to use. Mr. Sterling patted my back. "Let's go sign those papers, Mason. We have an empire to run." As I turned and walked toward the private elevators, I caught one final glimpse of my parents in the reflection of the brass doors. They were rushing outside, abandoning the gala they had fought so hard to attend, rushing out to pick up the broken pieces of their golden child, just like they always did. Only this time I wasn't there with a broom. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Fan 62MUC1 852. The morning after the gala, the city felt different. The air felt cleaner. I arrived at my office at 7 a.m., poured myself a black coffee, and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the skyline. My phone had been ringing off the hook since midnight. Unknown numbers, blocked caller IDs, voicemails completely filling up my inbox. I didn't need to listen to them to know who it was. The desperation had a distinct frequency. At 9:30 a.m., my intercom buzzed. It was my executive assistant, Sarah. Not my cousin, but a sharp-witted professional who guarded my door like a fortress. "Mr. Mason," she said, her tone laced with apprehension. "There is a woman in the lobby. She's causing a bit of a scene. She claims she's your mother. Security is asking if they should escort her off the premises." I closed my eyes, taking a slow, deep breath. I knew this was coming. A narcissist's playbook only has so many pages. When intimidation fails, they pivot to victimhood. "Send her up to conference room B," I instructed. "Do not let her near my office. Have a security guard stand outside the door." 5 minutes later, I walked into the conference room. It was stark, minimalist, and intimidating. My mother was pacing frantically. She looked terrible. Her makeup from last night was smeared. Her clothes looked slept in, and the polished, superior aura she always carried was completely shattered. When I walked in, she stopped. She stared at me, her eyes darting over my expensive suit, my confident posture, the heavy mahogany table between us. She was looking for the scared, compliant 18-year-old boy. He wasn't there. "Mason!" she gasped, rushing forward. She reached out to grab my hands, but I smoothly took a step back and gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Martha," I said, my voice deliberately flat. She flinched at the use of her first name. "Mason, please, don't be like this. We are family. Blood is thicker than water." "Blood is just biology," I replied, taking the seat opposite her. "What do you want?" The tears started flowing. "It's Elijah. He's ruined, Mason. That display last night. The investors he was trying to woo, they all saw it. His company is going into default. The bank is foreclosing on his house. He owes hundreds of thousands of dollars." She leaned across the table, her hands clasped in a praying motion. "We spent our entire retirement fund trying to keep his business afloat. Our inheritance from your grandfather, the money we saved, it's all gone. We have nothing left. But you have so much." I stared at her. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. "You came to my place of business, after ignoring my existence for 7 years, to ask me to pay off Elijah's debts? He's your brother," she cried out. "He made mistakes, yes, but he's family. You can't just sit in this glass tower and watch him drown. You have the power to fix this. One check from you, one good word to Mr. Sterling, and you could save his life." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "I want you to listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. 7 years ago, you threw a birthday party. Do you remember?" She swallowed hard, looking away. "Mason, that was a long time ago. We were trying to help Elijah through a tough time. You wrote his name over mine," I continued, ignoring her excuses. "You sang his name first. When I walked out the door, you didn't run after me. You called me days later and threatened to take away my college fund. Money you had already given to him anyway. You didn't care if I ended up sleeping on the street. You only cared that I made a scene and embarrassed you. I was a bad mother," she wailed, trying to force a confession to gain sympathy. "I admit it. I made mistakes. But I'm begging you now." "You didn't make a mistake, Martha," I said coldly. "You made a choice. You chose your only son 7 years ago. You fed me to the wolves to keep him warm. And now that he's burned the house down, you want me to build you a new one." I stood up, buttoning my jacket. "The answer is no. Not a single dime. Not a single favor." She stood up too, her sadness instantly evaporating, replaced by the vicious, toxic rage I remembered so well. "You are a monster," she screamed. "You are a cold, heartless monster. I gave birth to you. You owe me." "I owe you nothing," I said, turning my back and walking toward the door. "Security will see you out." By noon, the harassment campaign had officially begun. The narrative had shifted from begging to extortion. They realized I wouldn't pay them out of guilt, so they decided to try and shame me into compliance. My phone blew up with text messages from extended family members I hadn't spoken to in a decade. Aunt Clara sent me a novel-length message calling me a sociopath and a disgrace to the family name. Cousins left voicemails accusing me of abandoning my elderly parents to starve. They were trying to create a social media firestorm, tagging the firm's accounts in vague posts about corporate greed destroying families. Elijah even managed to find the email address of one of my junior analysts, sending a pathetic, rambling message claiming I had stolen his business ideas to get my job. They were buzzing like angry hornets, trying to find a weak spot in the glass. I didn't engage. I didn't reply to a single message. Engaging with a narcissist is like wrestling a pig in the mud. You both get dirty, but the pig likes it. Instead, I picked up my office phone and called Thomas. Thomas was the firm's senior corporate lawyer. He was a shark in an expensive suit, a man who dealt with billion-dollar litigation before lunch. I asked him to meet me in my office. When Thomas walked in, I handed him a printed stack of the emails, texts, and social media screenshots. Family drama? Thomas asked, skimming the top page. Extortion, I corrected him. They are attempting to defame my character and disrupt my professional environment in order to secure financial leverage. I want it stopped. Today. Thomas smiled, a slow, predatory grin. I love a clean cut. What do you want to do? Draft a cease and desist, I instructed. Make it legally terrifying. Cite defamation, harassment, and tortious interference with business relationships. State clearly that if they contact me, my employer, my colleagues, or any of my associates again, we will file a civil suit that will tie up whatever pathetic assets they have left in litigation for the next 20 years. Consider it done, Thomas said. I'll have it sent via certified mail and hand-delivered by a process server to your parents' house and your brother's apartment by 5 p.m. Thank you, Thomas. That afternoon, I received a notification on my personal phone. It was a direct message on LinkedIn. The sender was Julian, my former best friend. The guy who sold out my 18th birthday party for a wad of cash and a pat on the head from Elijah. I opened the message. Hey Mason, man. It's been a crazy long time. I saw the news about the Sterling merger. Dude, I always knew you were going to do huge things. Listen, things have been really rough lately. The job market is brutal. I was wondering if maybe we could grab a coffee? Maybe catch up? I'd love to see if there are any openings on your team. We used to be a great team, right? Miss you, bro. I stared at the screen. The sheer lack of self-awareness was staggering. He wasn't apologizing. He was just trying to attach himself to the biggest ship he could find. Exactly like he did with Elijah. He hadn't changed at all. He just changed targets. I didn't feel angry. I just felt a profound sense of pity for him. I moved my thumb over his profile, clicked the 3 dots in the corner, and hit block. I deleted the message. It was a small, satisfying click. At 5:15 p.m., Thomas sent me a quick email. Packages delivered. Signatures secured. The Hornets have been smoked. I walked out of my office that evening feeling lighter than air. The legal wall was up. The moat was filled. My phone was silent for the first time in 24 hours. As I walked down the street toward my favorite steakhouse, I realized that establishing a boundary isn't a cruel act. It's an act of self-preservation. When you lock the door on toxic people, you aren't punishing them. You are simply refusing to be their collateral damage anymore. The storm was finally over. Now it was time to watch the aftermath. The wheels of karma grind slowly, but they grind exceptionally fine. Over the next 6 months, I didn't have to lift a finger to watch Elijah's life completely unravel. The information just naturally trickled down through the city's financial grapevine and public records. The cease and desist order had terrified my parents into absolute silence. They knew my lawyers would destroy them. Left without their favorite punching bag to blame for their misery, they had to turn inward. And it was brutal. Elijah's company went into Chapter 7 bankruptcy. He had spent years faking it, throwing lavish parties on company credit, leasing sports cars he couldn't afford, and alienating anyone with actual talent. The market simply corrected him. The bank repossessed his downtown loft. His leased car was towed away in the middle of the night. With nowhere else to go, a 32-year-old Elijah had to pack his remaining clothes into garbage bags and move back into my parents' house. The house of cards collapsed, and it landed directly on Robert and Martha. Without me there to absorb the tension, the perfect family illusion shattered into a million sharp pieces. According to the gossip that occasionally reached me through extended relatives who were too scared to message me directly but loved to talk, the house became a war zone. My parents had drained their life savings, their retirement, and their emergency funds to keep Elijah afloat. Now the money was gone. The golden child was broke, jobless, and furious that the world hadn't handed him a crown. He blamed my parents for not supporting him enough. He blamed them for not being richer. The screaming matches could be heard down the street. The neighbors, who used to be impressed by Martha's carefully curated image of suburban perfection, were now calling the police with noise complaints. My mother started working a part-time retail job at 60 years old just to pay the utility bills. My father started drinking heavily, spending his evenings yelling at the television. Elijah refused to get a regular job, claiming it was beneath his status as a former CEO. He sat on their sofa, drinking my father's cheap beer, complaining about how unfair life was. They were trapped in a prison entirely of their own making. They had sacrificed their quiet, hard-working son to feed the ego of a parasite. And now the parasite had consumed the host. I would occasionally see their names pop up on public lien registries. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I didn't feel the need to ride in on a white horse and save them. You cannot save people who are committed to their own destruction. Watching their downfall wasn't about vengeance. It was just a reaffirmation of the laws of physics. Actions have consequences. Gravity always wins. I was sitting in a cafe on a crisp Tuesday morning, reviewing a quarterly report, when I heard a hesitant voice. "Mason." I looked up. Standing near my table, holding a paper coffee cup, was Sarah, my cousin, the girl who had made eye contact with me across the crowded living room on my 18th birthday and chose to look away. She looked nervous. She was dressed in medical scrubs, looking exhausted but genuine. "Sarah," I said, putting my pen down. I didn't smile, but I didn't scowl either. I remained neutral. I know you probably don't want to see anyone from the family," she said quickly, her words tumbling out. "I just saw you sitting here, and I couldn't walk past without saying something." I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Sit." She sat down carefully, clutching her coffee cup like a lifeline. She didn't launch into a sob story. She didn't ask for money. She just looked me straight in the eyes. "I want to apologize," Sarah said. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. "For your 18th birthday party. I saw what they were doing. I saw you standing against the wall, completely alone. I knew it was wrong. I knew Julian was an idiot, and Elijah was stealing your day. And I didn't do anything." I watched her face. This was the first piece of genuine honesty I had heard from anyone in my bloodline in over a decade. "Why didn't you?" I asked quietly. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Because I was a coward. Elijah was popular, and your parents were so intimidating. I was scared that if I stood up for you, they would turn their anger on me. I wanted to protect myself. But I've lived with the guilt of watching you walk out that door for 7 years. I just needed to tell you that I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that." I sat back in my chair. The tight knot in my chest, a knot I didn't even realize was still there, loosened just a fraction. An apology doesn't erase the past, but it does validate the pain. "Thank you, Sarah," I said sincerely. "I appreciate you saying that." She nodded, wiping her face. She stood up. "I'm so proud of what you've done, Mason. Truly. I won't bother you again." I watched her walk out of the cafe. I didn't invite her back into my life. Some bridges, once burned, are better left as ashes. But as I took a sip of my coffee, I realized that holding on to the anger was no longer serving me. The wound had finally closed. The city skyline sparkled like a sea of diamonds through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse apartment. It was a Friday night, precisely 1 year after the gala that changed everything. The air in the room was warm, filled with the rich smell of roasted garlic, expensive red wine, and genuine laughter. I stood in my kitchen, leaning against the marble island, watching the scene unfold in my living room. I wasn't alone. Carter was sitting on the leather sofa, passionately arguing about vintage watches with Luke, my brilliant junior associate who had helped me set the trap for Dylan. Chloe, the PR manager from the Sterling Foundation who had shut Elijah down at the door, was laughing loudly, pouring another glass of wine for her husband. These were my people. This was the family I had built. There was no tension in the room. No one was competing for the spotlight. No one was performing a fake version of themselves to appease a fragile ego. We were just a group of people who respected each other, who had fought in the corporate trenches together, and who celebrated each other's victories without a shred of jealousy. Luke walked over to the kitchen island to grab a handful of grapes. "Great food, boss," he said, popping a grape into his mouth. "Much better than the takeout we usually eat at our desks at 2 a.m. I smiled. Don't get used to it. Come Monday, we're back to the grind. That tech merger isn't going to finalize itself. Always the slave driver, Luke joked, walking back to join Carter's debate. I looked around the room. I thought about the house I grew up in. I thought about the chaotic, suffocating energy of my parents' living room. I remembered the feeling of shrinking myself down, folding my personality into a tiny box just so I wouldn't upset the fragile balance of the Elijah show. I had spent the first 18 years of my life believing that family was a life sentence. I thought blood was a contract you couldn't break, an obligation to absorb abuse, neglect, and manipulation under the guise of loyalty. I was wrong. Blood is just an accident of birth. True family is a choice. True family is the mentor who sees your potential when you're just a kid fetching coffee. True family is the assistant who has your back when a snake tries to steal your work. True family is the people who show up for you, not because they share your DNA, but because they share your values. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. I walked over and opened it. It was the concierge from downstairs, holding a large white bakery box. "Delivery for you, Mr. Mason," the concierge said with a polite nod. "Thank you," I said, taking the box and placing it on the dining table. Carter looked over. "What's in the box? Did you buy us a dessert to soften the blow of working this weekend?" "Something like that," I replied. I opened the cardboard flaps. Inside sat a simple, elegant cheesecake. No extravagant decorations. No obnoxious, colorful frosting. Just a clean, perfect cake. Right in the center, written in dark, unassuming chocolate lettering, were two words: "Happy Birthday." I realized, with a sudden, sharp clarity, that today was my 26th birthday. I had been so busy building my empire, managing my team, and living my life that the date had completely slipped my mind. I hadn't ordered this cake. I looked up. Chloe was leaning against the back of the sofa, smiling a knowing smile. "Carter noticed the date on some of your HR paperwork," she said. "We figured a guy who works as hard as you do deserves at least a slice of cake on his birthday." I stared at the cake. My vision blurred just for a second. "Come on," Luke yelled, clapping his hands. "Cut the cake. I'm starving." I picked up the silver knife. My hands were perfectly steady. I didn't have to share this cake. I didn't have to wait for someone else to blow out the candles. I didn't have to hide in the hallway, wearing a denim jacket, preparing to run away into the night. I was standing in my own home, surrounded by my own people, eating a cake that was meant entirely for me. "All right," I said, slicing into the rich dessert. "Who wants the first piece?" As the laughter swelled in the room, I looked out the window one last time. Somewhere in this city, in a cramped, angry house, my brother was probably screaming at my parents about his failed life. They were trapped in their cycle of misery, consumed by the toxic dynamic they had chosen to protect over me. But I was free. I was miles above the ground, breathing clean air. The shadow they had cast over me was gone forever. I took my slice of cake and walked out onto the balcony. The night air was cool, the city humming below me like a giant, mechanical heart. I leaned against the glass railing, looking down at the tiny, moving headlights of the cars on the avenue. I thought about the 18-year-old kid walking down that dark suburban street with a duffel bag. If I could go back in time, I wouldn't tell him that he was going to be a millionaire. I wouldn't tell him about the penthouse, the custom suits, or the respect of billionaires. I would just tell him that he was right to leave. Because the money isn't the victory. The victory is the silence. The victory is waking up on a Sunday morning and realizing that your heartbeat is calm. The victory is knowing that no one is going to manipulate you today, no one is going to demand you sacrifice your happiness for their comfort, and no one is going to erase your name. People will tell you that you must forgive family. They will tell you that holding on to a grudge is like drinking poison. But what they don't understand is that walking away isn't about holding a grudge. It's about putting down the poison they keep forcing you to drink. Forgiveness doesn't mean granting access. You can forgive someone from a distance while keeping the door locked. I don't hate my parents anymore. I don't hate Elijah. I just feel a cold, absolute indifference toward them. So, to anyone listening to this who is sitting in their room right now, listening to the screaming downstairs, to anyone who is being told that they are selfish for wanting basic respect, to anyone who is constantly being pushed aside to make room for a golden child, you are not crazy, you are not selfish, and you do not have to stay. There is a whole world out here waiting for you. It's tough and it's unforgiving, but it is fair. Out here you get what you earn. Out here your name belongs to you. Don't wait for them to throw you a party. Pack your bag, walk out the door, and build your own empire in the quiet. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it's a heavy one, but I hope this resonated with you in some way. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you just to save yourself? Let me know down in the comments. I read as many as I can. Also, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, you are part of an elite group. Comment the letter W below. That stands for winner. It's a secret code for the 1% Club, the resilient, incredible people who stay until the very end and who know what it means to fight for their own peace. If my story helped you, or if you just want to hear more raw, real experiences like this, please hit that like button and follow the channel. We are building a community of strong people here, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. Until next time, stay strong, protect your peace, and keep walking forward.